I will just say for all of my Star Wars fans or Mandalorian fans, this is the way. Like the future of your business will be in an automated dashboard. So using some of the things we're talking about today to get your business ready for that, the longer your business survives, the more it is going to be either competitive because of its access to data or less competitive. Oh, here's that one again, Liz.
Yeah. So after we've sort of settled this whole how are we viewing it, what am I looking at, how often do I see it thing, then we ask ourselves, well, who all is in charge of this data and who else can see it? Because access to data makes people feel accountable for data.
I
So
will
then,
argue that you can't be accountable unless you have
oh no.
access. So if only
Well,
your managers have access, then they're responsible for herding the cats to produce the data. You can't actually fire anybody over
Well,
poor.
I will say that I've encountered several situations where people have been held accountable for the data, but have not had access to the data, which is a whole other can of worms because you can't control what you can't see. If you don't know that something is happening, you shouldn't actually be held accountable for that piece because you can't make those changes that are necessary until further down the line because you're seeing it too late potentially to make quick changes and quick switches.
I hear HR violations too. So many times our job descriptions say you're responsible for this, but they never give anybody ability to measure it. Then they just say, hey, that didn't happen, so you're out. And we're like, well, how was I going to do that? I don't have any data, right?
Yeah, and so this portion of the worksheet, if you can go back to real quick,
Yeah.
is set up to let you go through and say, okay, here are those KPIs that we talked about before, those sort of standard 8 KPIs, and saying who has access to this data, who has access to this measurement. No one has access to it. One person has access to it, or all these people. And the question is both where are you now and where does this need to be? How does this need to spread out?
Cool. So let's make that happen. Um, oh yeah, this is where you wanted me to tell that story because everybody has a number, and I'm so big on this HR side of recruiting and trying to figure out how people are accountable. So I do have a story for this. Everybody wants everyone on their team to have a number, right, Liz?
Oh, for sure.
But we've already talked about people can't even access the data and the costs aren't aligned to the outcomes. So the financials aren't set up so that the data can even roll out to the things you want them to be accountable. I want you to run a profitable marketing campaign. Really?
Okay.
All
I would like to do
right.
that too.
How are we going to measure that? Right? Well, I do have a little experience in this bus. Working with a client, a growing healthcare, opening a new location each year, looking at how to manage the budget. Um, we said, hey, we're growing at 404% above industry average growth rate. We are killing it. And with opening a new center every year, we need to make some growth moves and move some of our labor out of agency and in-house. We need to like start growing a department in here. We really need to get some of the social media advertising up, and we need to, do direct mail now for more facilities because direct mail actually works. Um, and the response is, seriously? How many locations do I have to open to get some economies of scale around here? Like, why does the budget per location keep going up? I want to get it back down to like 50 grand per location. How does that have to happen? Well, that's a very baffling question, right? Because marketing's like, I don't know why the budget per location is not aimed at 404% above industry average growth rate. We're going to have to find some agreement here on what the number is because I'm not going to have this conversation with you repeatedly about my budget approval. And we found it because the locations do not actually produce money. They just sit there. If no one comes in the door, you don't make money. So just because they had always done their budgets by location did not make that the best way to manage budgets. So I kind of geek out on budgets. I like budgets. I like to know what happens if I just spend that budget and what I get out of it. And in this case, we were able to come to an agreement on a profitability KPI that the one job of the marketing leader was to reduce the cost of customer acquisition. Of course, I asked, hey, do you agree with this? If you agree with this, then I don't want to see you poking around in my budget. I just want to see us measure this number, and I don't want to have to get every single piece of my budget approved by you if we agree that my number is decrease acquisition cost per patient. Had some hesitation. That's not the way we've always done it, but he agreed ultimately. And we said, all right, now we're setting it out, right? We've got 6% or $6 customer acquisition cost. And our budgets are now accountable to an outcome. Oh boy. Problem rearing its ugly head here. First, how do you calculate the KPI? So that's going to be a challenge for a lot of your organizations. And in the 4-hour version of this workshop, we go into a lot of how to calculate KPIs. The nice thing about dashboards is they do it for you. So that's pretty spectacular. However, in this particular case, we had to agree on what are all of the costs associated with the cost of customer acquisition. And then how are we going to calculate it? Total number of, total number of admitted patients. And then we get our average cost per patient. This is the way you would use that other worksheet to get that. And here we go. Here came the problem, right? Again, no one's given me access to QuickBooks as the marketing leader. So where am I going to get this data? I have to go to the CFO's office every time I want to get my number and get his data. Oh, and I can't know the number of patients because there's this regulation called HIPAA that blocks me out of the system that lets me see the number of patients. So the only real solution here, other than a lot of people walking into each other's offices, which this was 2018, imagine in 2020 if my way of being held accountable was to walk over to someone's office every day and get my numbers. That wouldn't have worked so well. Virtual work definitely requires access to these numbers in a I asked you and you looked it up and told me kind of way. So we need a dashboard. Liz, tell us what is required for dashboards to work.
So for dashboards to work, you need a couple things. You're going to be measuring some different things. You're going to be measuring both your tactical KPIs and your strategic KPIs. Before you build a dashboard, you're going to want to do a couple things just to make sure that everything's ready to go. And one of those things is actually knowing what those KPIs are. Go through and take a look at the whole process. Use those worksheets. Go through and say, here's what we need to be measuring. Here are the tactical KPIs. These are the things that we need to measure with the inclusion of finance so that we can take a look at, are we tracking ROI? Are we tracking the average cost of different things? And then those more deep measurement strategic KPIs that are talking about how things are going, how things are looking, and help make everyone more accountable down the line.
So I always mention to people that the most disrupted organization in automating data, which luckily McKinsey and Gartner and everybody says it is the department within your organization that is ripe for disruption with digital transformation, is the accounting group. So accounting and finance. However, the biggest advocate for automated dashboards is also finance. They're the ones who get asked to approve budgets all the time, and they're completely blind as to whether or not those budgets are actually doing anything. So what information do they have to know whether or not they should approve modifications to budgets as the year goes on? But here you can see in order to get those strategic KPIs that we're talking about, you have to segregate your costs in your system. So if you know what KPIs you want to track and you can see how the costs have to be segregated to look at those numbers, you then have to go into your accounting system and retag and reclassify some things. And I think Liz will be the first to tell you, and she told me, so I'm just repeating what she said, is that you really want to be able to set a timeline as a team for how far back you're going to go reclassify your financials.
Yeah, don't ever think that you need to measure every piece of data that has come out of your business since the beginning of time. When you're starting with these processes, because you have to go through and you have to get these systems in order, we're going to talk about data health in a couple slides here, but when you're bringing all these pieces together, pick a point in time and say, we are going to start measuring from January 1st of 2020 or January 1st of 2019 back maybe a year or so, and so that you can get some historical data, but consider that basically the switch point where you're going to make sure that everything is aligned from that point forward so that you can track things from there onward and start developing your internal benchmarks from that point. If you're working even from predictive metrics, if you're going all the way to that end of things, having everything set up so that you can track starting from that sort of, here is my drop point of when measurement started, because it's going to make everyone's life so much easier.
Yes. So I saw we only have 15 minutes, Liz.
Oh no.
We're going to have to get cracking. You and I love this topic. We'll just stay all day. Like, if you want to stay and hang out with us, we're cool. But, Liz, we've really been talking about these segregated KPIs that live in all the different systems. Tell us what we're seeing here.
So when we're looking at segregated KPIs, that's looking at the KPIs that we can measure just directly out of one single source. The number of leads generated in a pipeline. They're those things that are not really necessarily linked to anything else and can be measured and tracked within one thing. The downside of this, a lot of times, these are going to be your vanity metrics because they don't have that further depth. So that's when we get into the integrated KPIs. When we're taking a look at that higher up level of saying, this is how marketing as a whole functions. So we're looking at, here's our website data, here's our social performance, here's paid ad performance, here's SEO, here's how we align there along with the spend and those sorts of things. So we get that extra step further to measure sort of that whole department view. But then as we get a little bit further, we get into those relational KPIs. These are very intensive. These deal with correlation. These are using data sets from either every system or a good portion of them in order to track overall pieces of data. You're using these when you're looking at forecasting, when you're doing any sort of analysis of the existing market or market share, and especially when you're going into predictive modeling. So these are sort of the three levels of things that you can go for.
Our goal is to get you to integrated.
Right. The goal is integrated. Relational and getting into those crazy metrics, that is the next step after. If you don't have integrated set up and functioning perfectly, relational is going to be a pain. I will tell you that from personal experience.